In a long-awaited ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court Monday handing a partial win to former President Donald Trump. The justices deciding that presidents, quote, are entitled to immunity from prosecution for official conduct while in office, though they can be prosecuted for actions taken in a private capacity. The case is now headed to a lower court to set parameters. Joining us now is Joshua Kastenberg, law professor at the University of New Mexico. Joshua, perhaps you can elaborate on what happened. Does this mean the former president is free from charges?
No, it doesn't mean that he's free from charges, but it does put significant restraints on the prosecution. So, for example, there can be lots of illegal conduct, but they exist under the veneer of official acts. And the other restraint on the prosecution is that they cannot bring in official acts to prove an illegal course of conduct. So, in other words, if there's some dirty money being changed in the future on receiving ambassadors, the receiving ambassadors is a purely constitutional process. And it would seem to me that based on this ruling, there's nothing that a Justice Department could do to prosecute a president for violating it. So they've narrowed the scope of what a president or a sitting, former president can be prosecuted for significantly in a way that the Constitution is silent on. And in a way that the framers of the Constitution never envisioned. And yet they've strengthened the hand of not only former President Trump, but every succeeding president in a precedential way.
Interesting. Is a trial likely before the election?
No, it isn't anymore. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is the court was remarkably slow in getting this decision out, much slower than in United States versus Nixon in 1974 or Goldwater versus Carter in 1980, where within a week and a half, the court ruled on significant constitutional issues in both. This is the slowest ruling that I know of involving presidential power. Even Harry Truman didn't have this graceful amount of time when steel mills were seized during the Korean War. That's one reason. It just took too long. The other reason is the majority opinion created as many questions as they did an answer, and those questions have to be decided at the lower court level. And of course, they observed in the majority opinion that it's the fault of the lower court for not doing that earlier, but the lower courts, in defense of the lower courts, they ruled on the most significant constitutional issue of all, which is the president does not have immunity against being charged criminally. So it's the majority that created this scenario, and the scenario means it's really unlikely to actually have a trial.
So did the court set a precedent today?
They did. The court significantly strengthened the hand of the presidency, not just former President Trump, but every future president, because every future president can now commit illegal acts within the guise of an official presidential act and more or less be able to get away with it. And an example I'd use is if you turn the clock back to 1973, Congress made it perfectly clear to President Richard Nixon, you cannot engage in military activities outside of Vietnam. And that includes Cambodia and Laos. And yet President Nixon ordered a massive aerial bombing campaign into Cambodia. Now, he was never impeached for that. But Congress set a bright line. The president violated it. And we can have this scenario play over and over again in the future with no possibility of criminal prosecution. And the reason for that is commander-in-chief powers over the military are always going to be official acts, even if they're illegal.
The dissent essentially said that the majority gave the former president and all future presidents more power and more protection to commit misconduct. What does this mean?
Well, what it means is this. If you take this decision and you couple it with the January 6th charging decision, it means that presidents can go to extraordinary length to not only maintain themselves in power for a second term, but also to set the stage to maintain others in power after they leave in ways that the framers of the Constitution never contemplated. In other words, it opens the door to all kinds of dirty tricks and foul play and the like in a way that the framers of the Constitution never considered. So it's precedential in the sense that it empowers presidents to violate the law.
Okay, Joshua, thank you for breaking this down for us. That's Joshua Kastenberg, law professor at the University of New Mexico.